Hi, my name is Jerry Streets. I'm the senior pastor of the Dixwell Avenue Congregational United Church of Christ in New Haven, Connecticut. Dixwell Church, as we refer to it, is the oldest African American congregational church, founded in New Haven in 1820. As we're celebrating Black History Month, but for those of us in the African American community, Black history is not just celebrated in a 1 month in a year, it's a year-round celebration and observation. I'm delighted to introduce you to some members of our congregation who are in their own right history makers. And so I welcome to this conversation today, Miss Helena Rodgers. Is it all right if I refer to you as Miss Helena?
No, you can call me Helena.
Okay, wonderful, wonderful. Well, tell us a little bit about yourself. Where were you born? Where did you grow up?
I was born right in New Haven. As a matter of fact, the street that the church is now sitting on was called Gregory Street. And I was born at 49 Gregory Street in 1939.
I didn't ask you your year.
No, but everybody probably knows. And I was the third of 6 children, third girl. And I was born by a midwife. And which is something that I found out through a conversation you had with Margot Taylor. That was something that was done years ago. But my first 2 sisters were born in the hospital. And I happened to be born by a midwife.
So your siblings, you had 2 older sisters and 3 brothers?
No, 2 brothers.
2 brothers.
And I have 2 older sisters and 1 younger one, Violetta.
I see.
And one of my sisters, Ina's mom, we lost her at a very early age. She was 37. I lost her in 1974.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Where were your parents born?
Fredericksburg, Virginia. My mother was the first of 2 children. She had a brother. And my dad was the first of 2. He just had a sister. And they ended up having 6 of us.
How did they wind up in New Haven where you were born?
I believe they came up for more opportunities as far as work was concerned. And my mother lived on Foot Street in a boarding house with a woman named Mrs. Allen. And that was before my dad came up here to Connecticut. And I'm assuming that he came to Connecticut like, I was born about 36, 37. And he was a laborer. My mother had a teaching degree, but she never got certified for the state of Connecticut. And she was a stay-at-home mom.
And you went to high school in New Haven?
Yes, I graduated from Hill House High School. As a matter of fact, the what is now Wexler School was Winchester School years ago. It was right across the street from where we lived. And of course, we just got up in the morning and had that breakfast and walked right across the street to school.
Well, what was it like growing up in New Haven during that time?
Well, I didn't really have anything to compare it with. I didn't have any problems. We lived in a 6-family tenement, and we were very close with the neighbors. And we just played with all the kids on the street.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't know what it was like to venture out to go to different areas to play because we had to basically stay within our area. And I kind of think my mother got us in the house early because she was probably tired. And we would peek out the window to watch the kids running up and down playing, but we were in the house.
Mm-hmm. So tell us a little bit about your family, your immediate family.
What, meaning my
your children? You have children, grandchildren, your husband?
Adrian and Carolyn, the only 2 that I had. 3 grandchildren, 1 grandson, 2 granddaughters, and 7 great-grands. But I have a sister that lives in Maryland that was a nurse. Unfortunately, she's been ailing for quite a while now. And she lives with her daughter and her family in Temple Hills, Maryland, which is not far from Andrews Air Force Base, a few blocks away.
And your husband?
My husband was Albert, and he's from a family of 10. He's the 4th child of a family of 10, and he went on to become John Daniels' executive assistant. His older brother, Larry, we just lost him about 2 years ago. And he was the only one that I know of that was in the military. He had 2 older sisters, and the rest of the kids, were a lot younger than him. And he went on to be chief operating officer at the Board of Ed for many years. And then he went on to be John Daniels' executive assistant. And
for our audience, John Daniels was the first African-American mayor of the city of New Haven back in the 80s.
Right. And him and Al were very close. They grew up together on Bristol Street, and which I don't know if you know where that is now. It's a couple of blocks from where our church is sitting now. But when my children were in elementary school, he got very involved in the PTA, and he became president of the PTA. And then at one time, before he got into that, he had his own construction business, but he couldn't get dependable people to work for him, so he had to close that up. But he always worked with his hands. And
how about your work? What kind of work have you been engaged in over those years?
Well, when I was in junior high school, my mother used to volunteer me to work, babysit all the neighbors. And I'll never forget, I babysat for a dear friend of hers overnight. And the family had 3 children at the time. I made a big $5, and I came running home, and Ma, I made all this. I made $5. She said, "Take it back. We're friends."
Wow.
And then, and I did a lot of babysitting. And then I eventually, while I was in high school, I worked at a daycare, Mrs. Walker's nursery school, which was on University Place. Both my sisters worked there. My mom worked there. So when my kids became of nursery school age, she took both of my children in to be in the nursery. And I got a real good rate on that, because now daycare is quite expensive. Yeah.
What would you say, given your experiences, what message would you want to give to, well, let me first say, what legacy would you want to leave your children and grandchildren? And what would you say to America, particularly Black America, about what it means to face the challenges that we've had to face as African Americans?
Well, first of all, just, be humble towards people, and, be good, keep a smile on your face. If you're kind to anyone else, they're going to be kind to you too. So treat everybody like you want to be treated. And hopefully that'll fly with them. And I'm very proud that I have grandchildren and children that really do that now. I really am.
Do you recall any experience where you had to deal directly with racism?
Yes. In 1957, I went to Virginia, and I spent a little time with an aunt, and she would go around collecting insurance. And her name was Aunt May. And it was a hot summer day, and I was kind of dry and thirsty. So we were going down the main drag, and I went into the store and jumped up on the stool to get a cold drink. I thought she would pull my arm out of the socket. She snatched me so hard. She said, "Girl, you can't sit up there. We don't do that down here." But see, I never ran into a prejudice situation until I went down there. And some of the teenagers in the neighborhood, we went to a theater one Saturday afternoon. And that was the first time I saw a sign that said coloreds and whites. And the coloreds had to go upstairs to the balcony, but I didn't mind going to the balcony because here in Connecticut, we would sit in the balcony because that's where all the kids had fun. But you couldn't do that, just randomly when I was down south like that. So it was some kind of experience for me. Never had to deal with any prejudice like that.
What advice would you give anyone who faces that prejudice today?
Oh, I don't know. That's a pretty hard question nowadays, because like if you're in a vehicle, for instance, if you have the chance, put your hand on the steering wheel and just stay there. And hopefully whoever's pulling you over, as far as law enforcement is concerned, to just, yes, sir, no, sir, or whatever, and do what they ask you.
Mm-hmm.
But like you say, easier said than done.
What legacy would you like to leave your children and grandchildren?
Like I said before, just humble yourself,
mm-hmm.
and pay attention to what's going on around you also. Keep a smile on your face and be gentle.
Well, when you think about all that's going on today, the Black Lives Matter movement and George Floyd's death and Breonna Taylor and others, how have you coped with the kind of stressors that people of color have had to deal with down through the years?
It's not easy. I pray on it and just say, just God, please try to make things better than what they have been.
Mm-hmm.
And hopefully we'll get over this. But the way some of these people are being treated, it's a learned behavior. And I don't think you could blame it on COVID, but it's the gun violence. How do you curb that? I was watching a TV program this afternoon, Dr. Phil, and I don't watch it all the time. I just happened upon it. And they had people on there saying that when they would talk about defunding the police, they really don't want to take away funds from the police. Police need to be taught how to deal with certain issues so they know how to handle it. And you defund the police, you want the police around. Mm-hmm. If need be. If you call 911, you want them to come as soon as possible.
Mm-hmm. Could you say a little bit about your involvement with Dixwell Church?
Well, I've been in Dixwell Church since 1952. You're laughing.
I was 2 years old in 1952.
Thanks a lot. I was a teenager. And the reason why I got involved in Dixwell, my parents were part of the Masons in the Eastern Star. And they had a lot of friends like Ernie Saunders, Walter Osborne, and the Yearwoods. And I think she was looking for some place to send us for Sunday school. And the Yearwoods and the Osborne and the Saunders, they all were part of Dixwell. And we just walked down the street to go to Sunday school. And like I said, that was 1952 when I actually joined. I think I was going there a few years prior to that, because they used to have what they called the pastor's class. And you had to go through the pastor's class for several weeks before you officially joined on Holy Thursday.
It sounds like the church has been an important part of your life and your family's life.
It has been. But where I was living years ago, we had no transportation. So when my kids were babies, I would put them in the carriage and walk up through Hamden to catch a bus to go down to Dixwell Church. Because we lived in a place called Brookside, and there was no public transportation, and we didn't have a car. So that was the only way I could get to church. And my mom and Reverend Philpott started a small church in the area that we lived in. And that was when you could walk across the brook and up the hill to go to Sunday school and church. And that was in the early 50s.
Well, is there anything you would like to say in conclusion to our audience about life, your experiences, about New Haven, about being involved in the church, whatever you like to share?
Well, let me put it this way. I'm not going to leave Dixwell. Some people are not satisfied with some of the pastoring that we've had in the past, and they left and never came back. I'm not leaving. I think when I do leave, I'd like to say I want to go out feet first. You know what I'm saying?
Well, that's a long, long way from now.
Let's hope. Let's hope. But I enjoyed Dixwell. I've been a chairperson of the Women's Fellowship for many years. And of course, we haven't been doing much lately. But and I came upon that by accident. A lot of people might remember Carol Moore. And when she moved out of state, I was sort of hooked into taking over, which isn't bad. You know, I enjoy doing it, and I enjoy being around people too. So, and I hope my children and the children that they hang around with, you know, still, like I said, treat them like you want to be treated. Keep a smile on your face at all times.
Well, I've asked people this question before. If you could just whisper into the ear of Black America, what would you say to the wider Black community? What would you want to leave them thinking about?
Trust in the Lord. Trust in the Lord.
Well, I think that says a lot right there.
It does, I think.
Well, thank you very much for agreeing to have this conversation. Appreciate it very much.
Okay. God bless you.
Hi, my name is Jerry Streets. I'm the senior pastor of the Dixwell Avenue Congregational United Church of Christ in New Haven, Connecticut. We celebrate Black History Month every day of the year, but during this very special focus on Black history, it's my pleasure to share with you profiles of members of our congregation who are in their own right history makers. And so to this conversation today, I welcome Attorney Alan H. Bowie, Jr. Welcome, Alan.
Thank you very much, Reverend Streets. It's an honor and a pleasure.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, where you grew up, where you went to high school and college and professional school or graduate school.
Sure. So I was born and raised here in New Haven. I say here, but I'm actually in Houston right now, but I'll be back there tomorrow. Born and raised in New Haven, of course, went to New Haven public schools, K through sixth grade, did a short stint in Catholic school, graduated from career high school, but then went on to the Howard University, where I studied economics and minored in community development. Thereafter, I went to the Wake Forest Law School and graduated in 2016. I think I like to say I defied the old adage that Connecticut's largest exports are college students, because after finishing up in North Carolina, I moved back here in 2016.
And when you came back, did you come back to begin a career in law?
Absolutely. So I began my career at the law firm Carmody, Torrance, Sandak, and Hennessy, where they sort of took a chance on me and made me a hybrid. And what I mean by that is most lawyers are either strictly transactional or litigators. And I was both a transactional business services attorney and litigator. So I spent 4.5 years there, where I did a bunch of work both on the client advising side and litigation too. I had, of course, argued and appeared in the trial courts, argued my first appeal in the Connecticut Appellate Court shortly before I left private practice to join BIC Corporation, where I am now. At BIC, I serve as senior legal counsel and have a similar hybrid role where I work on employment matters and am a trusted advisor to the Human Resources Department on our key employment matters throughout North America, but also manage broadly litigation for the company. So that's everything from commercial litigation to products liability, where someone might be alleging that they are or had been hurt by one of our lighters, one of our shavers, etc.
I was going to ask you to remind our audience what the BIC Corporation does or produces. Absolutely.
So our main categories are stationery, which would include pens, things like, sticky notes, and all of those things, lighters, but we're also having different forays and ventures into other items. We've recently acquired a company called Rocketbook that makes interactive notebooks, Inkbox, which makes semi-permanent tattoos. And we also have a body mark pen that we do, which is a newer product that can be used to make, semi-permanent tattoos also. So the company, although it has its main focuses, has, since then, branched off and is continuing to be innovative.
Was that your area of interest of practicing law that led you to law school?
Yeah, so I decided very young that I wanted to be a lawyer. I was about 8 or 9. My Uncle Jim had been a federal judge in Philadelphia. And I remember going to a ceremony for him when he was named chief judge of that court. And there was my first opportunity to see a courtroom and all of the, energy that goes around being a lawyer, being in a courtroom. And I decided that, this was the career that I wanted. So aside from very small stints and wanting to do something else, I've pretty much known always that I wanted to be a lawyer.
So you're bringing up an important point about not only exposure, but having role models that could inspire a young person to think of themselves in that role. In this case, it was a relative.
Certainly.
And you had other relatives in other professions. So I assume, tell us about them and why do you think you found your way to law versus one of those other areas?
I think it was really just that sort of striking memory. I have so many other mentors in my family that do great things and, led very honorable and successful careers. But for instance, my grandfather was a lifelong musician, music teacher, and I am in some ways a musician. I sang for Trinity Boys Choir. I play the trumpet. I've taken piano lessons. I've always been around music, but I didn't have the same sort of drive to do that as a career. But at the same token, I think my grandfather is one of the, more formative role models that I've had. Similar, to my Uncle Bill, he's a chemist. I know for sure after the first couple of science projects that I did that I didn't really want to be in a lab coat. So I think although I haven't followed the same careers as some of the other, men examples, not even to mention some of the women examples in my family, I've taken bits of who they are to apply to what I do, both in my walk in life and my walk in my career. So I've embodied many of those things. I just didn't go into those same, areas.
And I knew your grandfather, the beloved Bill Bowie, who ran the after-school arts program at Dixwell Church, where you're also a member. So you mentioned 2 of the men in your family, but what about some of the women?
So the 3 women who stick out the most to me are my mom, my Aunt Carol, and my grandmother. Yeah, my mom is one of the, hardest working people that I know and really taught me about making it happen, against all odds. My grandmother is probably the sweetest person that I've ever met and really taught me how to care deeply about people and forge genuine relationships. And I think that quality is what has made the difference in my career, and also in my, civic engagement and other, activities. Really caring about people goes a long way. And then, my Aunt Carol was just amazing. She was very smart, very inquisitive, nothing that I feel like she didn't know or wasn't curious about. So if anyone says that I have decent cocktail conversation, it's just that idea of being, inquisitive. So those three women are very formative. I could actually name a lot more, but, just thinking about how, they've, taught me how to work hard, or, taught me how to care about people, or to just really look towards the future. One of the greatest pieces of advice I got from my Aunt Carol was, if you're good at what you do, the money's going to come. And what I really learned from that is, I think that there's always going to be room for excellence, but don't get too caught up in that. Think about also the things that make you a full person, and continue to be, inquisitive and curious as you move through life about other things, not just your career, or just not how you make a living.
For our audience, would you just mention the full names of your mom, your aunt, and your grandmother?
Sure. So we have Patricia Parker, Elsie Violet Bowie. People at Dixwell will remember her as Vi Bowie or Vidi, and Carol Giles.
Wonderful, wonderful. When you think about your experience at Howard, and then going on to Wake Forest, how did Howard prepare you for Wake Forest Law School?
That's a great question, because they're sort of demographically sort of the opposite, but I feel that Howard very much prepared me. Going back to things that my family has sort of instilled in me, talking to my Uncle Bill about going to college, he told me, academically you're strong, and will continue to be strong. College is about who you meet and the relationships that you make. And at Howard, I just learned so much about the Black experience. My vision of the Black experience is rooted in growing up in New Haven, but, meeting Black folks from all across the country who were very much different shows you that we're really not monolithic, but also it was the first time, other than, my group of friends in high school, that I looked around and saw just thousands of Black folks who are highly skilled, highly capable, and going on to be world changers. And that really motivated me to do better. And I think I learned a lot at Howard about what it was going to look like to be a Black person in, either corporate America, legal America, or whatever, space that you were going to be in. And it really instilled in me a sense of pride in who I was, but also a determination that, have that level of excellence that's required, to be highly successful. So by the time I got to Wake Forest, I had mentorship, I had direction, and I had support. So when I got there, I viewed it less as an intimidation factor that I was there, and more so that this is a step on the way to where I'm, heading. And with it being like a really good law school, I just felt that Howard prepared me to take the next step in my life and to, move on to do the things that I'm doing now.
Mm-hmm. From your perspective, what would you want older generations, my generation, if you will, to understand about your generation?
That's a great question. I think we get a tough break. That, we're sort of the participation trophy generation, to a certain degree, that, we want everything too fast. We always need constant feedback. But I think that there's something really special going on, not only in my generation, but in future generations, where based on the hard work that your generation has put in and the sacrifices that you've made as our parents, as our pastors, as our mentors to really push the needle forward, that there's a certain level of challenging the status quo that's very important in these upcoming generations. And, I'm sure some people might get very frustrated with some of our actions, but I think that there are a lot of dedicated and capable people that will continue to, carry the torch forward.
Mm-hmm. When you think about your practice now, your profession, how do you handle the pressure, and particularly if you feel that some kind of bias is going on because you're a person of color and a male, if that has happened? Maybe it hasn't happened yet in your experience.
I face those things head on to the extent that I can, or I won't say to the extent that I can, to the extent that I experience them. Being an employment lawyer, my whole life is talking to companies about managing their risk based on biases that are manifesting in the company, right? So like discrimination and harassment don't necessarily need to be intentional. Some things are unintentional, but if you don't call out those things and challenge the status quo, nothing is ever going to happen. So one of the ways that that might arise is if I'm having a conversation with my boss and he's lending me his perspective as, you know, who he is and asking me about mine. To the extent that I'm comfortable, I'm very candid in those moments, because if I don't have those conversations, who will? So just understanding that there were people who came before me who had difficult conversations and maybe much more difficult than I try to take up those things artfully and as best as I can, but, you know, continue to challenge the status quo on those things. But part of it is, even when you're not actively experiencing the discrimination, if you're the only lawyer of color at your firm or in your department, that's a bias in and of itself. So the other thing that you can do is create opportunities for others. And one thing that I try to do is be an opportunity multiplier. If there's something that I can't do and there's a person of color or a woman that I know who would be good for that role, who might not get the opportunity if I didn't speak up, I try to do that each and every time. Because we all have to really support each other and create opportunities for others. And it's not just about me.
Mm-hmm. Have you had the experience of walking into the room and you're the only person of color, and you get the sense that everybody around the table is shocked or surprised or bewildered or not quite comfortable with how they are perceiving you even before you open your mouth?
You know, I haven't had that, but I could assume walking into the room as a 30-year-old Black man who's probably younger than a lot of other people in the room, you know, wears his hair the way I do and has a beard, as opposed to people who might have a shorter haircut and a more traditional mustache.
Or no hair.
Right. And I know implicitly I'm, you know, providing something that they haven't seen before, but that makes me be even more focused and poignant in the things that I'm doing. And I try to get to that point where I can see that the person is listening to me, because the core function of what I do is I need to have influence, and I need to be able to get someone to trust me, and to the point that I'm their trusted advisor. So I need to get there very quickly. And in order to do that, they need to know that I know what I'm talking about. So when it comes to meetings, the only thing that you can control, because you can't control the way that they look at you, the way that they feel about you, but you can control how prepared you are. And sometimes I'm prepared to the letter, to the section of the law, et cetera. But in addition to that, I'm not just going to be the lawyer who speaks in legalese. I'm going to try to meet you where you are. And I'm going to take my very expensive legal education that I, you know, pay student loans on all the time, and distill it in a very practical way so that you understand that I know what I'm talking about. I get where you're coming from, what the business need is, and how we can push this forward. So I'm always thinking about filtering through those things. And the way that you do that is to just make sure that you're prepared, make sure that, you know, you're an expert in what's relevant, and then you're making that strong connection with people. And after a while, I won't say that it doesn't matter what you look like, but I'm someone that, you know, that if you come to him, you can trust what he says, and I'm going to help move the needle forward.
Mm-hmm. What would you say gives you the fire in your belly that fuels your passion for what you're doing? I mean, you as you said, you're 30 years old. You're in a strategic place. This is not the end. This is the beginning of a journey. What's fueling you? What's your fire?
A couple of things. I'm innately a problem solver. I look at legal issues as a puzzle, and I like putting puzzles together and figuring out what the best thing is. Part of it is just a sense of achievement, and knowing that if I do these things, I may possibly, and I mean this in the most humble way, you know, change to a certain degree the way that they look at people who are like me, no matter what that is, you know, young people, et cetera. So the fact that I do it might change, you know, the next person who comes in, particularly if I can mentor one of them or if they work for me, et cetera. And to be quite honest, a lot of it is just, I want to make my family proud. Sure. They've worked so hard and sacrificed so much for me, and have given me so much love and support on my journey. And I think the best way to pay that back is to do my best. And I feel really fortunate and blessed that I'm very happy in the practice of law. You know, I don't know, you know, what God has in store for me. I know that he does have a plan, but I don't hate going to work. I'd probably like it a little bit better if I didn't have student loans, but, that's my main, criticism of my choice. But I feel really blessed to be able to do what I'm doing. And, to the extent that I can, challenge the status quo, achieve and then make my family proud, I'm feeling all right about all of it.
That's wonderful. Could you say a little bit about your family for our audience, the siblings, parents, whatever you like to share?
Sure. So anyone who knows me or has had an opportunity to talk to me knows that I'm a bit of a historian for both sides of my family, and I love my family very deeply. My connection to Dixwell Church started in 1970 when the Bowie family moved from Wilmington, Delaware, to New Haven to found the Dixwell Center for the Arts. And that was really that deep connection. And I learned so much from my grandfather, not only about music, but being a student in life. But he would invest in each and every child that he came across and make them feel special. And the idea really is that each and every child is special. And the way that he sort of mentored or even you'd say ministered to them was through music education, but it was like about being a student in life. My grandmother, his wife, was one of the most amazing people that I've ever been blessed to know and to benefit from. And I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about my mom's family and her parents and how much they've really impacted me, whether it's, her mother being an educator or her father being a businessman. So that's kind of like big structure. As many people may know, and I'd be remiss if I didn't highlight, my older brother, Billy, was in a car accident in 2005. And he's one of my life-changing mentors, confidants, and even best friends. My brother, although having a very high in his spinal column injury, has written a book entirely by mouth that he's looking to publish, has started a business. So when I think about things like achieving and, the ability to move around freely and do things, I'm very much motivated by the fact that my brother has severe limitations and has been able to do all of the things that he can do. So with that, and particularly with the idea that he has such a beautiful spirit, and although you can get down about your situation, and I'm sure that he has at times, he's very much a rock and a mentor for a lot of people. So I just think about that in my positive spirit. So I could probably go along all day about the, amazing members of my family, whether it's my mother, my father who passed away when I was young, but I just feel blessed that God chose me to have this family. And that at the end of the day, I can do things for them. They can do things for me, and that, I can make them proud as much as they make me proud and, push me along the way.
Well, without revealing too much, if you will, where are you 10 years, 15 years from now? What is there some inkling of where you can imagine yourself being 10, 15 years from now?
The first two things that come to mind are happy and balanced. I think as long as you're happy and you keep yourself in balance, you're in a good space. But to that end, I'd like to be a general counsel of a Fortune 500 company. Maybe on the path to being CEO. Those are things just professionally. I'd like to continue to be present in the local and national communities, whether it's legal or nonprofits. I would like to have awarded several scholarships from the William and Violet Bowie Scholarship for Music. And, I see myself being married and hopefully having 2 or 3 kids and, looking forward to the future.
Wow, that's exciting. Well, all of us here at the church and in the greater New Haven community are very proud and of you and are inspired by you. If my last question, and I appreciate you taking your time while you're on the road as well. If you were able to whisper into the ear of Black America, what would that message be?
Just one message would be so hard. I'd just say, keep going. You're very much loved. You're very much seen. I think there's much more hope than is present with the 3 years of how heavy the world has been. I think in some ways there had been a plateau with certain of the efforts that were being made to better things and make them more equitable, but we need to continue to challenge the status quo and keep moving things forward. But, I remember the night that Obama was reelected, my grandmother called me on FaceTime in her 90s and told me that she never thought that she would see this day. She grew up in a neighborhood that happened to have a white family, and their position was that there was a black heaven and a white heaven. And surviving that and all of the work that she did and all the hope she had, I don't think that she would see that thought that she would see that moment. She also said she wanted to live another 30 years to vote for me for president. I don't know that that'll happen, but I also think about the world that my grandmother was born in 1920, but someone being born in 2022 will grow up knowing a Black woman as vice president and a Black woman on the Supreme Court. And I think that those things are special. And that's not to say that those things are enough and that there's not much more change to be made. I read once that if the diversity efforts remained the way they are, it would take 40 years to achieve parity for women in the C-suite. But there's a lot that can be done. And I just want the people of tomorrow to continue to be hopeful and know that they have my full support, and anything that I can do to be an opportunity multiplier or to support people on their journeys as people have supported me, I'll be there to do. So we got to keep pushing. We got to love on each other. We got to enjoy the moments that we have with each other while we're here. And I think everything's going to be okay.
Well, thank you, Attorney Alan H. Bowie, Jr. And those names, each of those words mean something, that whole title. And so thank you. And thank you for being the person you are.
Thank you very much, Reverend Streets. I appreciate you.
Thank you.